Right, hello, and welcome to Alien Familiar Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG Podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Kyle Perkins. Hello.
Before we get started, you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook, facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And if you would like to help us out with supporting this show, you can do so at patreon.com/alienfamiliarmedia. So if you enjoy our content and would like to help us out with hosting costs, any help would be greatly appreciated. And our topic today, we are going to be talking, well, hopefully this is going to be the first in a series that we do of how to design adventures. This particular episode, we are going to be talking about battlefields, how to design a fun adventure around the site of a battlefield. I got the majority of my experience in this in our Abena campaign that was running whenever we started this podcast, and we had a wrap-up episode on this podcast about the Abena campaign. In that campaign, we were using the Savage Worlds rules, and the player characters they ran a mercenary company. Part of running the mercenary company was that they were hired out to engage in warfare, in mass combat, and that was a major focus of the campaign itself. Kyle, you played Alkir, who was second in command of the mercenary force,
And first in command of my heart.
and eventually you became first in command when Talon decided to no longer be it.
Well, that just goes to show you, if you want it in your heart, you can imagine it in real life. It's the secret. And my secret to being a good commander in mass combat was to know the rules and use them. Clayton, take it away.
So one of the things I did for this particular campaign, and I try to do this with every campaign, is I have a brief summary of the most important rules that the players are going to need. And in this particular game, I printed out 2 pages front or just on the front, of basically the flowchart of what a round in the mass combat looks like. But before I can get into what the player characters can do, I want to kind of talk about what the game master preps and what it will exist on a battlefield that is completely out of the player character's hands. Things such as, well, to some degree, where the battle is taking place. It all depends on who has the advantage of choosing the battlefield. Throughout history, this has been the make or break point of most battles, is whoever chooses the battlefield has immediately a greater advantage because they're able to pick the most advantageous spot for them to fight from. This is why Rome won so many battles. Their ability to choose battlefields and their ability to basically shape the terrain of the battlefield to their own advantage. It was common practice for the Roman military, for the Roman legion on the march, to pick up stakes in the beginning of the day, go to where they were going to rest for the night, and then build a fortification there where they were spending for the night. And this fortification was on par with any of the established fortifications that were going on, among the Germanic tribes, or the Celtic tribes who they were fighting. So the ability of the Romans to select their battlefield and bring their own fortifications with them was huge. And in the context of a role-playing game, the ability to manipulate the battlefield, especially with high-level characters, especially with characters with high-level magic. There are some spells that are just designed for creating a battlefield. I said I wasn't going to get into the stuff the player characters could do, but I'm just going into...
You idiot.
Yep, I'm an idiot. So, before I go into all the like cool spells and things that the player characters can do, I do want to go back and focus on the things that are beyond the player characters, beyond their purview, and that is the terrain. It is vitally important for the game master to, one, decide what the terrain of the battlefield is going to be before the battle starts, and also to convey that information to the players. Like, being very descriptive is absolutely necessary, but also looking at the way that land is, the way that, like, hills or just flat plains have slight contours to them, the way that, like in a real world example, like in the Battle of Gettysburg, the way that some of the fields outside of town were very gently sloped allowed for the Union to be able to look out and see this vast plain. But then when the Confederates began marching up, they used basically some low-lying areas so that the Union thought that they had perfect view of like a mile in front of them, but the Confederates were able to use these basically like low-lying, not even valleys, just kind of depressions in the land to sneak up and get to within charging distance of the Union line before they even knew what was hitting them.
I gotta tell you, depression really sneaks up on me too. But in all seriousness, line of sight. You're literally talking about line of sight rules, which I had never dealt with line of sight in combat as a DM until the most recent few sessions of the game we're currently running, my Wanderers campaign. It's a homebrew sort of fantasy setting. And it is amazing how easy it is once you get over the geometry of it and being obsessed with kind of perfection in your thinking. Case in point, you've got a ridge that's 30 feet tall and a building that's 20 feet tall, 100 feet away, and in between there's a riverbed. And, at first you're thinking, how in the world, even with a battle mat, can I show this? Like, I need to have some 3D maps. I need to go in there and really make this realistic. And in my experience, just here recently, you tell your players about the Gettysburg Hills. You let them know that they, if they don't already know, can use some of those things to their advantage. And the rest of it, I think, falls under the purview of do what you think is fair. If you find that, all right, someone's up on top of the 20-foot structure looking up at the 30-foot ridge, and they're trying to find someone who is on the back side of that. You might think, all right, their line of sight seems to make that impossible, but I really would like this person to spot them. I find that as long as you are... You know what? Cut all of that. I'm rambling. I have no point.
Well, I've got a point for you, and that was the fact that was an incredibly well done arena that you made for our characters to fight in.
Thank you. I'm very proud of the arena.
The way
to get there.
The way that all of us had to then use our line of sight, like actually think about, we were looking at it on a 2D map, but each one of us had to think about, okay, I'm down on the ground. There is this structure over here that I can't see past, so I can't. It was also hard because, like, I could see Jordan's character, his miniature on the map, but my character didn't know that.
Right.
So I really had to stick with what was actually within the line of sight of my character. And it also became important when, like, for instance, when Nina's character started slinging fireballs, whether or not they could see the points where they were sending these fireballs to. The line of sight became a major component of that battle, and part of why each one of us was like just fighting tooth and nail to get every advantage in that situation that we could.
All of that said and taken into consideration, don't get intimidated by the challenging nature of terrain and line of sight and just choose to ignore it and go with a boring, flat battlefield. Don't do that. If you're in a situation where someone is on a 30-foot ridge looking at someone in a flat basin 30 feet below, they're obviously going to see them. But the example I was fumbling with there with, like, someone is on a building that's 20 feet tall. Another person is on a ridge that's 30 feet tall. And you're trying to figure out, I'm not sure if there's line of sight or not, and you want to build a model and stretch a string between the minis. I just had people roll perception versus stealth to just let the dice kind of decide. If I knew for sure, yes, you have line of sight on that person or that unit. That unit does not have line of sight on you. I dictated that. Don't be afraid to dictate. You're the DM. But if it was ever in question, that's what I was going to say. Use the skills built in combined with the terrain. I never had to do it, but there were times when I was tempted to give someone advantage because I was like, I think you can probably see that person, but I'm not sure. Roll me a perception at advantage and see if you can catch their stealth. Like, that was my point.
Just elevation isn't the only factor, but by God, elevation has been one of the major factors in warfare throughout history. I mean, to hold the higher ground really is a significant advantage, regardless of what some Sith do with it.
Don't try it.
Actually, I was referring to when Obi-Wan cut Darth Maul in half. When Darth Maul had the high ground.
I see.
So other things besides just having the high ground or having high points and low points is...
Oh my God, Clayton. Darth Maul had the high ground. Obi-Wan, on the ropes, going down. Jumps up, kills Darth Maul. The high ground means nothing.
Yep, and then...
Anakin Skywalker sees Obi-Wan. Yep. Obi-Wan's got the high ground. Anakin's like, haha, nice trick, bitch. I got you. But he just sucked, and it doesn't matter. It's all about Obi-Wan being a good fighter, not the high ground.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man. All right, we can go back to it. Wow, that really clicks. Man, it's like poetry, rhymes.
And that is why, one of the reasons why I absolutely hate the original trilogy as a whole.
Wait, the original trilogy?
Or the prequel trilogy, sorry.
Okay.
So besides just terrain, like the elevation, there's also whether or not there is anything obscuring your sight, such as brush or trees or anything like that would affect whether or not people can see around the battlefield. Are there any bodies of water? Are there any, like, particularly rivers? Rivers are huge factors in warfare from the beginning of warfare. The ability to traverse a river, if there is a place then that you can cross a river, chances are that both sides, like if the one side that doesn't take advantage of there being a narrow place to cross is going to lose, because that's like Alexander the Great, in one of his big victories against the Persians, he was able to get to them because he was able to get to a low point in a river and ford it before the Persians were able to cut him off. Because if the Persians had been able to get over and cut him off, he would have had all of his cavalry basically in the water, like up to the bellies of their horses, and any archers could have just fucking picked them off. And there's example after example in history of bridges and places where you can cross rivers being incredibly important. That's why, like, whenever there's an invading army, you almost always want to destroy all of the bridges between the invading army and yourself in order to stop their advance. It was a big tactic in France in World War II, just blowing bridges. Hell, it was in the movie Saving Private Ryan, where they had to blow up the bridge at the end so that the Germans couldn't get to them. And there's a really awesome story of a Viking berserker in like 800 or 900 AD fighting off an entire army of English warriors, one man holding a bridge and fighting them off so that his companions could escape from the battlefield and basically get out of there without hardly any loss of life for the Vikings. But that one Viking holding the bridge just held back an army and just slew hundreds of Englishmen.
That's awesome. What, How did he do that?
Well, bridges were, at the time, you didn't make a bridge any wider than you had to. So it was basically the width of a cart and a little bit of leeway on either side. And one person standing broadly with a big fucking axe is going to be able to hold an area that's only like 10 feet wide. As the 300 Spartans can tell you, when you can narrow, like, numbers mean nothing whenever the enemy has to come at you in what it amounts to is as single or double file line.
I'm literally thinking about this as a 10-foot bridge in width, and a Viking taking up a 5-foot square, and if anybody tries to squeeze past him, he gets an attack of opportunity, and he can just hold that thing, and the enemy can only advance 2 at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike in D&D, the more Englishmen he fells, now that's rough terrain for their comrades to try and walk across the bodies to get to this guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's wacky. I love that.
It's a tactic also used in like zombie apocalypse stories where you just start killing them and the bodies pile up and make it even more of a barrier to prevent them from getting at you while you continue to hack them down.
Oh my gosh, the very first grid-based combat I ran in the Wanderers with the, essentially, zombies in the brine wells, your guys' immediate tactic was to bottleneck them off with furniture and just start shooting arrows from behind and stabbing them with weapons with reach, or letting them get close but only one at a time. Can you do this level of terrain density, or, not the word I'm looking for, fidelity, there we go. Whether it's a, 25 by 25 battle mat on a table with each grid being 5 feet, or a map you've drawn on a piece of paper that shows an entire county and how the battle is raging across it. Like, do you find that these strategies for showing your players the terrain can apply to macro and micro scales?
Absolutely. Whenever you're on the scale of armies, a regiment in that army is kind of the equivalent of a single player character. And you can represent them moving as a group from one point to another, and then another group can come up and block them very effectively, especially if there's a relatively narrow area. And waterways, again, play just as much of an important role, because once you get into the economy of scale of mass combat, it just seems to me like everything scales up very well from whether you're talking about an individual unit, like one person, or an individual unit as far as like a regiment of soldiers.
Here's an interesting idea we could maybe workshop on the spot here. If you are trying to allow Dungeons & Dragons specifically, characters that are bags of hit points, abilities that apply to their class with no, and it's better in 5e than it ever has been, but no true sense of balance. In a one-on-one fight, certain classes are going to have an advantage than others, like just straight up. But can you take a group of players in D&D 5e and have a battle mat where each, this what you said made me think of this, each grid point on that map represents the size of space that an entire regiment of fighters could go through, and each player, instead of being in control of one person that takes up a 5 by 5 square, they represent a regiment that takes up a however many by however many square, and you sort of extrapolate out the regiment's strength and abilities from that player's. So functionally, they're fighting with their abilities, but in the fiction of it all, they're controlling a regiment. Is that a cop-out?
I think that would be a pretty fair way to do it. There would be certain abilities that just wouldn't translate well. I'm thinking in particular like a rogue's ability to in 5e to do the cunning action, which is basically gives you the ability to move extra or move without provoking opportunity attacks. You kind of lose some of the more granular abilities, but for the most part, you could absolutely use hit points and attack bonuses. you could use like, you would have to substitute like area effect spells and translate those into targeted spells. Like a fireball would be more equivalent on that scale to like the firebolt ability. But then, particularly casters would kind of get shafted in that because unless you're extremely high level, you're just not going to have as many spells to be effective on a mass combat scale throughout the length of time that a mass combat takes place. Because a mass combat takes place, like historically, like over an entire day. You would have to do something funky with how much time is passing as well. Like, I don't know, just off the top of my head, instead of a round being 6 seconds, a round be like 6 minutes or something like that. Find some way of scaling time to be like the amount of time that is taking place in a round is bigger because the scale of the individuals of the units taking place in the battle are bigger as well.
I might have to workshop that. Come up with some way to, for the mass combat portions of a fight, have a lot of player flavor and abilities still work. Some things will not work, like you just discussed. Mm-hmm. A fireball will not be a 15-foot radius, right?
25 or 20 foot radius.
20 foot. It will not be a 20-foot radius area of attack spell because one caster's fireball is not going to be scaled up to take out 4 regiments wide worth of, or deal damage to 4 regiments wide worth of soldiers in a formation. But a lot of other things could apply. Mobility, initiative, attack bonuses, stuff like that. Range somewhat if you have a regiment of archers. And then maybe when the battle reaches a point where combat is going to occur closely, maybe the DM, me, could zoom back in on the battlefield and then go back to actual players controlling their tokens, fighting the, important units of the other ally. Very much like a real-time strategy game. You're zoomed out, you're seeing all of this happening. Zoom in and focus on the individual combat for a little while and allow players to use their hard-fought abilities. I mean, you guys are level 12 now. I don't want to have the final battle, much like the horrible but kind of fun NES game Karnov, take away all of your abilities in the final fight. That would suck.
Yeah. And if you're gonna do that, I think that maybe instead, like, something that hit points could represent is not just, like, each hit point could represent a person in your regiment. So when you take a hit point of damage, that means one of your people died or is taken out of the fight. And then healing could then be in the form of, well, those people weren't dead. They were just like knocked out. Those people are brought back up and being in the combat. So as the combat flows and say, for instance, the Paladin's regiment is taking damage, it's the Paladin's regiment has 100 people in it because the Paladin has 100 hit points, and Paladin's regiment has taken 50 points of damage. That means that half of the Paladin's regiment is dead or out of the combat.
I like that.
And the reason why I say that is because of the original history of the hit point is 1 hit point was how much damage it took to kill a person, to kill an individual in a battle map. That was what a hit point meant. It was a representation of how much damage. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was some sort of artillery would fire 1 shot, and if it hit like however many hit points of damage it dealt, that's how many people died.
Do you know what game this was from? Originally?
This is way back in the like original tabletop wargaming, like when it was being invented in the 1800s.
Oh wow, that's cool. I've never looked into that before. Man, nerds have been around forever. So in translating some of this stuff, let's talk more granularly about distances and ranges for spells and abilities. What do you think would be a good way of translating spells and long-distance bow shots for a unit of archers into this a regiment is a 5x5 grid square system?
Personally, I would say that like all your melee attacks, that's just one regiment right against another when
Directly
fighting.
adjacent.
Yeah. Maybe thrown weapons. See, thrown weapons are a special case because, like, I want to be able to give them some range, but I mean, the distance you can throw something, especially a spear, isn't really all that great. So I would be leaning more toward just treating thrown weapons and melee weapons basically the same. And then things with like greater range, like some spells have a relatively long range. It's more than what you could easily travel in a round. Let's do that as, okay, I'm going to say that anything that is further than what a player character could normally travel in a round, that would be like a range 1, like 1 beyond what you could do. So I'm thinking that like the scale of the map would be each square would be how far a regular character could travel in a round. So typically a square would represent approximately 60 feet, but that's a weird number. So I would say 50.
It's a pretty even round one, yeah.
And that would give some scale of like spells and abilities that are range shorter than 50 feet. Those can only be done in the adjacent square. Things that are further than that, could go into the next square, and like 50 feet increments of like spells and abilities and stuff is how many squares you could fire. So, I'm blanking now on how far a bow can fire, but it's like
max range is 300 for
something like that.
I think so.
And then if you also use that scale, then mounted combat, instead of just being each regiment being restricted, just being able to move 1, then mounted combat, those mounted units could move 2 squares, and archers could fire far enough that they could still shoot like an approaching cavalry, still get their shots off before they would close into melee with them. I think I really like how that kind of mirrors how real mass combat has worked, particularly in the Middle Ages and earlier.
It also makes it a really easy to translate system for someone who has a basic grasp on D&D combat. This mass combat system is 0% more difficult to understand.
Right. That's one of the things I absolutely hated about the mass combat system in 3rd edition is when they finally printed the damn thing, the rules for mass combat were as long or longer than the rules for regular combat. And there wasn't a whole lot of stuff like translating one for one like we're trying to do right now.
Are you talking about that Heroes of Battle book you were telling me about?
I'm talking about the miniatures handbook for 3.5.
Oh.
That is the book I very first recommended to you, and then I went back and looked at it. And I was like, no. Don't read that one. Okay. I was wrong. Read Heroes of Battle.
Yeah, I like how that translates pretty directly. And to get back away from this thought experiment, though I love that, and hopefully those ideas will help you as much as they're going to help me. We didn't come up with that before we started this podcast. That was organic. But to get back to the topic at large a little bit, that was something I did not find it to be too bad in Savage Worlds in Urbana, the Urbana campaign, using Savage Worlds, having the what was it? It's right here. The knowledge battle. That's knowledge parentheses battle roll being a big determining factor in how things went, and having different actions you can do during a round of mass combat, and all of those actions, stuff like ambush, assassination, have a duel between champions, go and destroy the enemy supplies, stuff like that. That all made sense. That wasn't too bad. It was extra stuff to learn, but it was not that difficult to learn. In general, I, being a pretty rule-simplistic person in my RPG games, really like something that doesn't make combat already complicated any more complicated.
And, I can sing Savage Worlds praises till the sun goes down.
So I started outside.
Okay, till the sun comes up. The mass combat rules in the core book which it's only over a couple of pages. It has some of the things that are on there, but I bought a supplement called Tattered Banners that was specifically for running mass combats with player characters in mind. And the rules for that really gave, like, in the core Savage Worlds rules, there's just basically you can do like each character can do a heroic action during a round of the mass combat. And then in Tattered Banners, it goes into, well, here are some specific heroic actions you can do, and here are the subset rules that you can use to do that. And the subset rules are designed to be very similar to existing Savage Worlds rules.
That makes sense.
Another thing that the Tattered Banners rule supplement added was giving player characters specific battlefield roles. Like Kyle Alkir was a commander. He was also quartermaster, and there was something else you were as well that was like actually. I want to say there was something else you did, because I think everybody had 3 roles.
Oh gosh!
It wasn't something you did often because we only had a few mass combats and it didn't come up very often.
Maybe I was fairly sneaky and could do some of the sneaky stuff, assassinations, like sneaking in to destroy supplies. But whatever it was, I didn't do it often. Yeah.
Right. But whatever roles your character had, it gave you special actions that you could do during each round of combat to help sway the combat on your own. One thing that it wasn't in any of those, any of the supplements that I've recommended to you. Well, it might be in Heroes of Battle. I don't know. It's been a while since I've read it. But one thing that I think is absolutely tantamount for having the player characters do during combat is to find some objective on the battle mat that they can, like, basically zoom, like, you're doing everything high level, they're doing their actions, give them something that they can zoom in on the micro and do just as their characters. They have, like, the party has to get together and go do a particular objective that is crucial to the battle. I would also recommend that if you're going to do something like this, don't just give them one option. Give them like 4 options, because battles are incredibly dynamic. They're ever changing, and every decision needs to be, like, at the time felt like, oh, each one of these options is critical. There's 4 of them. We can't split up and do each one of these. We have to focus our energy and get one of these critical points done. That's why I don't recommend doing 2, is because, well, most parties think they can split up into 2 groups and accomplish something. No party believes it can split up into 4 and go do something.
At the end of the combat, I think the players should be thinking, I wonder what the outcome would have been if I had chosen to do any of the other 3 options instead of chasing the fleeing wounded commander of the enemy units. And that feeling really will add to the controlled chaos of a large-scale battlefield.
The way I recommend you design your adventure, at the top of your thing, have like your 4 the 4 initial options that you're going to give the player characters for them to go off as a singular player character unit to go do a special task. Have them have 4 options, and then have a few each one of those go off into a few options, or have a few outcomes that they can then influence the battle. And since you're the game master, you can have 4 options and then 4 completely different options down below, and you can just think about how their previous choice would influence the next one. Instead of having to come up with, okay, I've gotten 4 choices here. Each one of those 4 choices has another 4 choices, and then each one of those has another 4 choices, and then you're looking at making 4 times 4 times 4, and then you would end up having to make 64 options for a 4-stage battle.
That's a big secret of game design in general, something that I, having written a few visual novels and being a big fan of choose-your-own-adventure games and games like Mass Effect, where, you seem to have all these choices, but really there are only a handful of endings. Having that, and not letting them know you're doing this, but having that illusion of choice can sometimes save your sanity, while still having the players feel like they're really contributing to this ultra-dynamic battle. If you have 4 options, and actually 2 of those 4 options flow back into the same result, the players won't know that.
Mm-hmm.
They will think that their options have directly, Reagan-style, trickled down the line. I don't know, a little unethical tip there for you, but I love it. I do it all the time.
And I would also recommend, when your player characters choose one option, don't pick another option and have that one go catastrophically wrong. Because the last thing you want your players to feel like in a mass combat is that they're making the wrong decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Your characters are the big damn heroes. They need to be making the right they need to be making the right decisions, going there, and while they're there, they can succeed or fail. But the choice to go there is always the right one.
Yeah.
That is always, wow, you guys picked the most critical spot to go to, and this is where it's all riding right now.
This is not your players versus an army of 10,000. This is your players and their army of 9,995 versus an army of 10,000. Your players are the big important ones. They're the heroes. They're going to sway the tide of battle. But when they go to handle that choice they picked, the most important choice, the army's got their back on the other choices. Don't make them feel alone out there in this massive battlefield. Unless you want them to feel alone because it fits the theme for a while, but that's different.
Hey, getting caught behind enemy lines is an awesome place to suddenly zoom in on your player characters. They've been doing mass combat and they've been doing well, but suddenly you're like the other allies who aren't in the player character's control. Maybe they have to fall back. Suddenly the player characters find themselves surrounded by enemies, and the zoom in micro level fight is suddenly, oh crap, we have to get back to our lines because we're deep in enemy territory. There's nothing but death around us.
A really good way to give stagnant players or players who are camping or doing anything like that, being stationary, a good nudge in the back is to say, yep, you suddenly look around and you've been doing great, but the lines are retreating or moving to a new place and you need to fight your way out of here. You have to move. You can't stealth your way out of this. You can't talk your way out of this. You gotta go.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool pressure to have.
Yeah. I've also got a list of potential encounters or objectives that just the player characters could take care of in the course of a battle. Things like cut a supply line, attack the enemy baggage, destroy a particular artillery piece, or if the opposing army has special units, like maybe they have a corps of undead being led by a necromancer, or maybe they have just like in Lord of the Rings, maybe they have a cave troll. You give the player character something that they can focus on and a target that they can attack and cripple the enemy because they've taken away a big advantage of the enemy. Other things, rescue another allied unit that has been isolated. Finding a missing person. Like in history, the lords were leading the troops. They were the ones usually in cavalry, but there was always somebody of noble birth who was leading the footmen. And in the chaos of battle, if a unit gets circled and apparently gets annihilated, suddenly there is definitely a noble who is in peril. Either that noble has been captured or that noble has been killed. And it is absolutely imperative that you find out what has happened and, if possible, rescue them.
Great use for those pet NPCs the party loves so much.
Absolutely.
So put them in charge of an NPC regiment. Have them get in trouble.
Yep.
Attack the enemy baggage, you mean like shout out, like, your parents loved your brother more than you and you've never come to terms with that, like stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Man, that's nasty.
Yep.
Cut deep.
Yep. Emotional batteries. Commit emotional battery. Yep. Other ideas is take a particular strategic point. Take a hill. Take a tower. Take an entrenchment. Take a bridge. Rally a fleeing unit. This is great to give a break from the fighting, is to see that an ally unit is running away. So time to put the swords away and start negotiating, start using those social skills. Press an advantage or reinforce a buckling front. Like in the movie 300, there would be instances where a couple of individuals would just suddenly fight out in amongst, like, break the line, go out there and just kick ass with enemies all around them. Give your player characters moments to do that, but also let them know that they have a time limit, have an even more powerful force coming their way that they can see, so that they know they have a certain amount of time to get in there and take out a certain number of units or something, basically break the morale of a particular unit that is fighting before their reinforcements get there.
That's really interesting. Having that time limit in battle can really make this feel different and special, even if you're just using the same or a slightly modified version of standard combat rules. Back to Dungeons & Dragons, you think about fighting a bag of hit points that is usually the boss. There may or may not be a time limit. There probably should be. That makes for an interesting combat, but typically you're just rolling damage, using up spells until the guy falls or flees or whatever, but it's just kind of bop bit, back and forth. Basically telling your players you have 10 rounds until a force that is impossible for you to deal with is going to be here. Make every round count.
Or you see that the enemy unit that you are fighting is starting to waver, but you can see their reinforcements coming. Can you get in there and deal enough damage to them to break them before their reinforcements arrive? Back on your previous point of just attacking bags of hit points. If you were to do this next thing that I would describe, I would probably punch you. Put us all on the front lines, and we're fighting, we're doing our attacks, we're getting attacked. 5 or 6 rounds pass, we've killed maybe 7 or 8 enemies of their force of 5,000. Okay, we've done 7 or 8 rounds of combat. Only 4,991 enemies left to kill. You absolutely don't want this to be just a...
That's only 40 more rounds of combat, Clayton.
If you tried to do that, I probably would punch you. And I take that back. I would punch you because I warned you.
I have a friend where if you horsing around or doing whatever or being annoying, if you cause actual pain of any level to him 3 times, you're going to get punched in the face. 1 time, you're fine. 2 times, you're fine. But he tells everybody, on that 3rd time, the 3rd time that you chuck a snowball too hard at me, I'm punching you in the face. It's happening. I warned you. There's got to be somebody out there who enjoys that level. Just some, what is that, masochist? No. Sadist? The one that likes to be hurt. Hurt me, daddy.
That's a masochist.
That's a masochist. Some masochist out there really wants to be all right, throw 50 enemies at us. Let's do this. Let's just grind through them. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah. I've got 120 hit points and an AC of 22. Let's go.
What about, speaking of bags of hit points, any interesting things we can think of for how to design bosses specifically for mass combat? What's an interesting way to throw boss units in there?
Well, your bosses need to be strong enough that, this is just my boss philosophy in general. The boss needs to have more hit points than what the player characters can take out in a single round. Period. Mm-hmm. And especially for a mass combat, that boss needs to have minions around him or her. This is one area where 4th edition D&D absolutely excelled And I can't believe they didn't carry the minion rule over from 4th edition into 5th edition. In 4th edition, the minion rule was that minion characters, they dealt a minimal amount of damage for a character of their level. They dealt a minimum amount of damage, but they went down in a single hit. A group of them could be pretty threatening because they all have the same attack bonus as a regular character of the level that they are being represented as. They hit as often, and they do a legitimate amount of damage, but they go down easy. And I'm amazed that it didn't get carried over into 5th edition, because it seemed like with everything else, 5th edition carried over like all of the really successful rules. The reason why the minion rule is so successful is because you don't have to track all the goddamn hit points for something that only has 20 hit points, but your characters can't kill in a single round.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that if a player, I never played 4th edition. No, I played it one time briefly. Never did minion rules though. You're saying if a player met or exceeded the minion's AC, it was dead. Like,
yes.
It doesn't matter how much damage they
yes.
deal. Well, that's interesting. I kind of like that.
And for like area effect stuff, if they make their save, then they are still up. If they failed their save, they're dead. Really easy. It really streamlined things, and it allowed you to have things that were easy to tear through, but could hurt you if you ignored them. And I would recommend to you that you use the minion rule.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that.
Yeah. The minion rule is my favorite thing from 4th edition that didn't get carried over. So I've said before that like each player character needs to have something active that they're doing on a battlefield. That's one of the things that I really liked about the Tattered Banners rules that we had in Abena, was that each player character had a strength that they could do on the battlefield. Like the sorcerer role could deal massive damage to the enemy. The armorer, their role gave the allied army like a little bit more toughness, made them a little bit harder to take out. Everybody needs to have something that they are actively contributing to the battle, because there's no feeling worse than playing the bard and you're just not doing anything effective that's really making a big difference on the battlefield, because you've got a bunch of like single target spells that are great against an individual enemy, but you can only cast Tasha's Hideous Laughter so many times on a regiment of enemies. So I want to kind of go over particularly the D&D 5th edition skill list and kind of describe the different ways that each one of the skills can be used in combat. And whatever game system you're using, there's probably some sort of analogs that you can figure out how, like, the World of Darkness skill list might be applicable in combat. I'm going to, because of the way that the D&D skill list is organized, I'm going to try to go through and hit each one of them and describe how each one of them can be used, because they had the design philosophy for these skills as being something that everybody would be able to use at some point in the course of a combat. I'm just going to go through the alphabetical list because that's how they're listed on the character sheet. Acrobatics. This is generally your ability to move around without being impeded. This could be your ability to move around hazardous terrain, get through, like I described the Battle of Agincourt, the knights on horseback got bogged down in mud. This would be your ability to basically skirt around obvious hazards and avoid being caught up in them. Animal handling. This could be if you are a mounted troop, handling your mounts. It could also be used to spook mounts that are attacking you. Arcana, use that to identify any spells that the enemy is using, or be able to determine whether or not a particular weather effect is being caused by some sort of spell, and recognizing whether or not you could counter that in some way. Athletics. get from one point to another much more quickly than what you ordinarily would be able to. So like if your movement is only, well, athletics, use it to push yourself or maybe scale some sort of enemy battlement or some sort of terrain that ordinarily would be undefeatable.
I was also going to say your ability to schlep more gear. You know, we have to get these supplies to the cannons up on that ridge, and you know, only you adventurers are, you know, able to do this quick enough. And you got, you know, the barbarians carrying like 2 big things of shells on his back, like. Absolutely,
yeah, awesome. Deception. Half of combat is half of war is deception, deceiving your enemy about where your troops are, setting up traps, doing feints, making it look like you're going to send troops around to reinforce a flank, but in actuality, like reinforce the center or something like that. Try to anything where you would try to obscure your true intention.
The dishonorable act of a fake surrender.
History, rolling to see if this particular area has been used in a battle in the past, because particularly in Europe, there were a lot of battlefields that were used multiple times. Especially like in the Greek islands or in modern day Greece, they had certain fields that they would use for battle because so much of the terrain in Greece was not conducive to the type of battle that they did in the phalanx formation. There weren't a lot of planes that were designed that were there that they could do those maneuvers on. So rather than create other modes of battle, they just fought on the same battlefields time after time after time. The Battle of Marathon, that particular field, had several battles that were fought at it. The Battle at Marathon that got commemorated with the race we now call the marathon was just one of many battles that took place there.
In Revelations, the final battle for everything is, you know, Armageddon is supposed to take place on the fields of Megiddo or Megiddo. I've never actually said that out loud.
Megiddo.
Megiddo?
Yeah.
Megiddo.
Megiddo. Armageddon. That's the origin of the word Armageddon.
Well, there you go. So yeah, that was, you know, the author of the
John.
John of an island name, whatever, doesn't matter. Anyway, it was an actual historical battle site. Many battles just happened to take place there. It was a strategic location in between people who happened to fight a lot. And so naturally, the author of the Book of Revelations believed the final battle for humanity and all of our souls will take place on Tel Megiddo. So yeah, that's interesting. That's something not a lot of people think about. It's a bit different because, you know, we're Americans. We don't have a lot of stuff like that here. You know, we're a bunch of young hot studs running around. You know, only one battle took place on Gettysburg, but certainly in places with thousands of years of culture.
Yeah. I mean, even in the Civil War, there were several battlefields that took place on the first Battle of Bull Run, the second Battle of Bull Run, Manassas.
Fair enough. You're on history.
History. Okay. Being able to identify if this site has been used for a battle and what those tactics were. Like whenever Patton was rolling through the Middle East, he read the Bible in order to know where Joshua fought his battles so that he could then fight the Nazis in those battles and use similar tactics.
What?
Yeah.
Weird.
Insight. Well, if your enemy is trying to deceive you, use insight to try to determine whether, like, to see through the deception, to see what their actual maneuver is going to be. Mm-hmm. Intimidation.
Oh, well, insight also is that regiment. How is their morale?
Absolutely.
Look from a distance. How are they doing? Is it time to strike? Stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Or even your own troops. See if are they getting ready to break? Intimidation. There's a reason why, as you are charging, you let out a battle cry. You're trying to cower the enemy. You're trying to scare them off the battlefield before you even start fighting. It's why the berserkers would bite their shields was just to intimidate the enemy, that these guys are so fucking crazy. They're running around naked, carrying nothing but a big fucking sword and a shield, and they're chewing on their shield because they can't wait to get into the fight. Investigation, maybe with something like, well, you could use investigation to try to find out like routes that, enemy, like the orders are being sent.
Battlefield intelligence, I think, would be used for that.
Battlefield intelligence, like decrypting encrypted information, decrypting notes that are sent in some sort of code. If you don't know the particular, like horn blast, horns and drums were used a lot in ancient battlefields to like basically let everybody else know what maneuver was coming up. So you could use that to try to tell what a particular message actually is.
Investigation could be a great one to have during a pre-battle phase, and anyone in the party want to go and investigate for supply train routes. That might be more certain. Well, no, that could be investigation. Tracking movement of troops would be more survival, but go out and try to capture some couriers to learn about these horn calls. Like, investigation, I think, could work just fine during the battle, but would be a really good one to have in a pre-battle phase as well.
Yeah. Medicine, probably going to need some medicine on the battlefield. Stop bleeding, treat infection, treat dysentery. I don't remember who Napoleon was getting ready to besiege, but Napoleon came up on a city and was getting ready to besiege it, and the leader of the city was being all arrogant and said something to the effect of, it would take 10,000 men to take this city. And then Napoleon sent a response back that was basically, I lose that many men every day to hunger. So taking care of your troops, and taking care of the wounded, most, like in history, most deaths in the military were not due to the wounds. Most deaths were due to either malnutrition or disease. Often malnutrition leading to disease. Nature, hell, being able to predict the weather, whether or not it's going to be a good sunny day or whether you're going to have rain, whether you're going to have some storm blow in and, I don't know, destroy the entire Spanish Armada as it's getting ready to come up and kick the ass of Great Britain.
Yeah. What was that? I believe it was a Japanese...
when the Mongols tried to attack the Japanese and the typhoon came through.
Yeah.
The kamikaze.
Or, this spot we've chosen to finally engage the enemy in mass combat. Oh, turns out this is the overflow route for the river when it comes up with a flash flood. We might not want to be here.
Mm-hmm. Or like a tactic that the Mongols used was, not just the Mongols, but anybody who had the manpower to do it, is if you were getting ready to besiege a city and that city was being fed by a river, you dam up the river or divert the river so that you deny the besieged city fresh water. Perception, just being able to see what is around you, see the different points where, notice where the terrain is to your advantage, where it isn't to your advantage, to spot those points where the enemy has to get funneled in order to get to you.
Spot a trap. It's an obvious one.
Yeah. Performance, give a rousing speech, give a rallying speech.
We will not go quietly into the night. We will not give up without a fight. We're going to win. We're going to live on. Aliens.
Exactly.
Being able to toot those horns, I think, and give the right call. You zoom in on a macro scale. Your bard is there as the, spotting and signal regiment gets overran. The bard runs up, picks up that horn, knows exactly what to play and in what direction to send that important message across the battlefield. That would be performance, hands down.
Yep. Did I skip and do persuasion before performance?
No, we haven't done persuasion yet. We did perception and then performance. And then I interrupted with my Independence Day speech.
originally I had anticipated on saying the whole thing about the like Independence Day speech and stuff for persuasion to basically rally your troops and all of that. And the performance was more of like getting these orders out correctly.
I fucked it up.
No, I fucked it up. I said performance and then I went and read or went over my notes for persuasion.
Well, how could one use persuasion on the battlefield?
Well, if your troops are routing, to talk them into staying and fighting, giving them the orders that they need, to give them the confidence that they need to stand against, an approaching, charging brigade of cavalry, to basically steel themselves against what is coming so that they don't flee in terror. Most battlefield casualties occurred not on the, not at the line where the forces met. Most of the casualties happened after one side broke and they were just run down.
Maybe convincing the enemy unit to turn tail, well, more intimidation. Convincing them to let you pass or join your side could be persuasion.
Particularly in the medieval times, mercenaries were used a lot. So persuasion to convince that enemy mercenary company to switch sides in the middle of a combat, or to convince an enemy noble that, hey, you come over to my side, I'll make sure you get a bigger chunk of land whenever I finish conquering all of your so-called compatriots. Religion, I could see using religion to, again with the Viking berserkers. The berserkers believed that by going insane in battle and fighting as hard as they could, they were ensuring that if they died in battle, they were going to heaven. They were going to Valhalla. It takes some religious conviction and convincing in order to make people do those sorts of things.
Perhaps spotting a weakness in the enemy's religious doctrine, or using something against their advantage, using a superstition they have, going around and spreading a certain mark over the trees in the forest they're marching through to decrease enemy morale, something like that.
Or if you're fighting ancient Egypt and you're Sumeria, you realize, hey, these people really worship cats. Let's strap live cats to our shields and attack them so that they'll be too afraid to harm their sacred animal to actually fight back. Really happened.
That's dumb. Poor cats. Wow. I got one for sleight of hand.
All right.
If investigation is discovering battlefield intelligence and decrypting enemy intelligence, sleight of hand is using that intelligence against them. It's a bit of a stretch, but having your signal company blast out conflicting battlefield orders or information, using sleight of hand to essentially, what movie is that? Darn it. It's a World War II movie, and they depict the Allies having these click, 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 these clickers that would signal I'm a friend.
I was thinking something different.
It's a older war movie, World War II, black and white, and it shows this young Allied soldier running up, and he hears something around the corner of this building, and he pulls out his clicker, and he goes click, 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 and the enemy troop knows of this, and he's got a bolt-action rifle, and he uses the rifle, kind of sleight of hand, to make a click, 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 click sound, essentially. And you hear, you see the young Allied troop go, they're friends, and run around the corner and just get blown away by this German. It always made me real sad as a kid. That's sleight of hand, though.
Yeah. Stealth, being able to move troops around the battlefield without being noticed, especially, any battlefield. If it's a dry day, there's going to be a lot of dust. There's going to be a lot of obfuscation about where troops are going, and using that to your advantage to get troops to a place without the enemy knowing that they're there. Then survival, like laying the types of natural traps that exist on a battlefield. In the Netflix movie, Outlaw King, they go into a very real battle where the defending Scots basically set up all of their fortifications around very strategic points, and everywhere else on the battlefield is just pits, like natural pits, very slippery terrain, basically using survival to manipulate the battlefield in such a way that you are able to funnel the enemy into the areas where you can most easily affect them.
Ewoks.
Yep.
I had mentioned tracking troop movements with survival, securing water and resources, wood for fortifications, food perhaps for the army in a pinch.
A lot of armies marched on their bellies.
Like a snake?
I mean, it was a popular way that the Romans did battle or waged war, was that they would send their armies out without enough provisions, knowing that they would just pick up the provisions while they were out there raiding the countryside as they were looting and pillaging. So
hurting the enemy's breadbasket while also being more mobile because they're not carrying such a massive supply train, essentially.
And that's, and that tactic has been used throughout history. That's why invading Russia in the winter is a fucking bad idea. It's a lesson that Napoleon and Hitler learned very well.
Well, that's all the skills. That's, and obviously that was Dungeons and Dragons 5e skills, but there are some ideas for you as a player, the sorts of things that applies to any system, the sorts of things you can do to be effective and have fun in mass combat. That isn't just swinging your sword around.
If you sit and look and try to think of these things, you can generally come up with something that you should be able to do, with pretty much any skill. Most skill lists are general enough that you're going to have some ability that you can manipulate, you can massage the mechanics in order to give you some sort of an advantage, assuming your game master is going to be okay with it. Are you going to be
as a GM, I'm always okay with massages, man. No, I really will be okay with thinking creatively, thinking outside the box for this. I want to do by the book, champions on champions combat because you guys are level 12 and you deserve to use your skills in that way. But I also want to see you all get creative with this home-brewed mass combat. And really, there are official resources out there. There's some we haven't talked about. The Unearthed Arcana is a very popular, but as I understand it, flawed. I've never used it. People seem to think that it's somewhat flawed way of doing it. Unearthed Arcana mass combat is what I'm thinking of, and there are a few others. But
well, I was just going to say about Unearthed Arcana. Most of the time, I see Unearthed Arcana is a kind of just a way for Wizards of the Coast to play test some stuff without actually having to make it to play test it and get some feedback before they actually implement something. I think that's pretty much everything that I've got on mass combats. I don't really have anything else to add. I will add though that as far as how to keep things fresh and changing, I think alternating between doing a macro level portion of a fight and then zooming in for a micro level thing, kind of switching back and forth between those two views a couple of times is probably a good way to structure so that your player characters aren't just doing one thing the entire time. And also make sure that you do give player characters time to rest in the midst of a battle. Battles last many hours, if not the entirety of a day in the ancient and medieval world. So you're gonna have to have times where your player characters are not on the front lines participating in the action. You can use those times to do healing or to do some sort of, just talking and finding out from the people who are leading the battle how things are going, finding out the intel of what you need to do next. Those are the perfect times to do that.
Take time for a little downtime, a little role play.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure they get their long rest in, and then before sunrise, have an ambush happen. That's fun.
Ready to move on to geek things?
Yeah, let's do it.
I've only got one. It is a website that is the Committee for the Advancement of Role-Playing Games. And they are all about basically spreading the word about like all of the benefits of role-playing games, promoting the ways that role-playing games can be used to like teach kids things, using it for educational purposes in schools, but also like used for therapy or rehabilitation, like in prisons, the way that it can be used to kind of like used for rehabilitation and
conflict resolution, and
yeah,
stuff like
that sort of thing. They're all about like all the different ways that that role playing games are things that can train skills, and also all the ways that they can train your skills and improve the way that you interact with other people.
That's cool. Is this a nonprofit or?
Yeah. Oh. The website will be linked in the show notes.
Mine's completely different. I want to talk about Death Stranding, baby! It's a great game. It's a weird game. I had been not terribly closely following it. Knowing it would be such a weird experience, I didn't want to spoil myself. I watched some of the early, weird, esoteric trailers, and then I just kind of jumped in and bought it. It is pretty fun. It definitely jives with a few things I enjoy and elements of my personality. Hoarding, organizing survival gear, high fidelity walking and running simulation, like having to dodge small obstacles while carrying heavy loads, and like juggling multiple fingers in the controller in multiple places, holding down multiple buttons because you're having to hold your backpack straps while also using a terrain scanner. It's got some kind of bogus stealth mechanics, and I haven't had combat happen to me yet. I haven't had that much time to play, but I understand that combat is a bit clunky. But the terrain and moving about it and carrying your metaphorical and physical loads around that terrain are masterfully done. It has all of the energy of traveling to Mordor alone, and I've enjoyed it so far.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but is this the first AAA walking simulator?
Believe so. It obviously, the joke is that games like Gone Home are I've heard them called walking simulators. It's really, colloquially, that's wrong, because those games are, move about an area, and the only thing that movement does is take you from one story element to another. Really, you're just learning through observing and interacting with elements of the environment. You hold down W on your keyboard, you're going to walk forward no matter what. This game is, in the literal sense, not the joke sense, a walking simulator. And it's the first AAA one I've seen. I think the best one before this was probably Quap.
All right, Kyle, why do you say we stop this bullshit and start designing your game?
I'm going to start rolling this dice. There's a sound. That was a die.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.